The president of the United States just said, yes, it was Iran's fault. He went on, when asked what happens next, he said, we'll see with respect to Iran. You know the situation well. What are the U.S. options at this point?
Well, I think the U.S. has basically got three options, all of which are scalable depending on how much they want to escalate the crisis. I think that the first option is diplomatic, and we've already started that at the UN Security Council and through discussions with regional partners and other partners. The second is to try and find new ways of adding pressure on the Iranians. And sanctions pressure an element of that, but certainly political pressure coming from a variety of countries might also be helpful. But I think the third and the most concerning, at least at this point, is the possibility of using military force to try and interdict and stop Iranian attacks on shipping. And this is something that I think a number of people watching the situation are concerned about, because there's a real risk of escalation the more these attacks continue from Iran.
Well, and you make a good point, because when you were sort of leading the Iranian sanction conversation back in 2015, did you know who was kind of leading the country and how that would play out versus now the U.S.? How do they know who to even start negotiating with?
Well, this is the thing. I mean, I think that at the time, we definitely had an Iranian presidency that was both empowered by popular support as well as by the supreme leader to try and engage in negotiations with us. I think a couple of days ago, the supreme leader closed the door on that fairly aggressively when he rejected the entreaties of Prime Minister Abe to help mediate between the United States and Iran. And he's been very clear since the U.S. withdrew from the JCPOA that he didn't see a viable approach to negotiations now. And this is part of the reason why I think restarting talks now would be very difficult. The Iranians just frankly have lost a lot of trust in the United States as a negotiating partner since we withdrew from the JCPOA.
Richard, we're just watching the video once again of that the small boat coming up next to the ship. The Fifth Fleet's in the region. Is there anything the Fifth Fleet can do to prevent this reasonably small sort of gunboat attacks with little mines? It's a big area.
Exactly. This is the difficulty of the strait as well, that it's a heavily congested waterway as well. I mean, certainly there are various different types of escort options that exist. But as we saw back in the late 1980s, at some level, the United States, if it wants to prevent these attacks, has got to extend its protection directly to the tankers, and that's a very complicated sort of option for us to even consider doing at this point. I think the more effective means is to demonstrate to Iran that these kinds of attacks are going to come with costs and that they're going to be multilateral in nature, and that's part of the reason why an international diplomatic effort has got to be an initial part of what we're doing here.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because I wanted to get your take on sort of the coalition in the area with the U.S., sort of Qatar, Saudi Arabia, the U.S., UAE. How does that all play into this as well?
Well, I think each of them have got their own independent military capabilities, but obviously we've engaged in exercises in cooperation with them for a number of years. We've got the means to coordinate operations, to be able to identify potential threats and targets and to respond to them. So there is definitely a role for the regional partners to play in all this. But I think part of the issue that we're going to have is that, as you say, there's a lot of small boats that are operating in the waterways. It's not possible necessarily to get at all of them. And so really you have to deal with the root of the problem, and that is Iran's perception that the only option it has at this point is to start lashing out on ships transiting the straits.